Hello and welcome to HALOT's Wargaming. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the new HALOT-X1 printer from PioCreat, aka Creality. Per the marketing email that I got, PioCreat is an independently operated sub-brand of Creality, specializing in the R&D and production of 3D printers, including resin printers and industrial-grade 3D printers, as well as 3D printing materials. The HALOT series of printers is now under that label instead of Creality, but I think the whole thing is under the Creality umbrella, if I'm correct. So I've never tried one of their printers before, but I have been printing for, 5 years now? It's crazy. So while I'm not really like a 3D printer specs nerd who's gonna nitpick the size of the screen or something like that, I do feel like I know a decent amount about 3D printing. And I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on this. They also sent me their wash and cure machine and some of their water washable 16K resin. So while this is primarily a 3D printer review, I'm also going to be talking about those things. And towards the end of the video, I'm also going to give my thoughts on the HALOT software that you can use to set your files up for this printer. So both machines were pretty well packaged. They did send me the auto feed unit, but I pretty much told them that I didn't want to review that, and they sent it anyway, so I don't really feel obligated to review that. Sorry. Maybe someday I'll use it, and if I ever use it in the future, then I'll do a review on it. How about that? So if you haven't seen this printer before, it does have some unique features. First of all, the build plate. This is an auto leveling printer, and the way that works is the build plate slots into these two channels on the top here, and it sits there loosely until a print starts. Then the vat actually raises up to the build plate and just presses it into place, and then it locks. The actual build plate has this grid pattern on it, and then there's two paddle handles on either side, and you flick them back and forth to raise or lower the grid, and that's supposed to pop the print off of the plate. You also get all of the standard 3D printer stuff. The vat seems well built. It has a nice big spout. I like that. And I've actually used it 2 or 3 times now. And it wasn't too bad to clean out. It's also got these like gull wing latches on the side. Instead of the traditional screws, these just clamp into place and keep the vat secure. I really like this design because it's pretty much impossible to get the hood down without closing them. Then there's the drip tray. I wasn't as impressed with this. The material feels pretty cheap. It's meant to slot into those locks on the side there. And I don't personally feel like it's held very securely, but if you just use it as a drip tray, it's not really a big deal. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I go through the printing process here. As I said before, I'm using their proprietary water washable 16K resin. Once everything's in place, you just close the lid. This lid can only be in 2 positions, just up or down. It can't be like halfway, by the way. You can either hook this printer up via Wi-Fi or you can use a USB. I stuck with the USB. I guess I'm old school like that. Then you just import the file you want and press print. It does come with a test print model, and when I say test print, it doesn't really give you any parameters or anything. It's just a figurine pretty much. So the test printing didn't really start off very well. You may notice this right here, this thing. This is the base for the model, which I did not know was on the print. And it did not adhere to the plate. It instead fell into the resin where it was submerged, and I think you know where this is going. Get ready for some printer issue tangents here, because when you're reviewing multiple products at the same time, you tend to have layers of issues that you got to work through, and that was definitely the case with this project. So the release plate works all right. I did have some issues with it. I'm not really sure why the base didn't stick to it. That was the only time I had that issue. The actual model released fine, but when I tried to remove the supports, I was really struggling. And part of the reason that I think that happened was because the actual burn-in layers weren't thick enough. So when you're printing on a normal flat build plate, if you're printing at like 0.05 millimeters, that first layer is going to be 0.05 millimeters. But since this thing auto levels and it has that grid structure, I think the first like 1 or 2 layers actually get embedded within the grid. So that makes the raft, or whatever you want to call it, a little thinner than it normally would be. And then it's a lot more prone to breaking, which is what's happening right here. But what I also didn't realize at the time was that the resin was being a little overexposed. I couldn't find any specific parameters for this resin on the website or anything prior, so I just went with the default on the printer, and it did turn out to be a little bit too much for this resin. So my first few prints were a little overexposed, and that caused them to be a little too brittle. Anyway, I was struggling so much to get these supports off of this thing that I eventually just gave up on it. At the time, I thought the supports were the issue. I thought they were too tightly packed together, so I decided to print some files that I know are going to be good. Some dwarves from our friends at One Page Rules. On my second print, the build plate didn't align properly. I wonder why that could be. Could it be the base and the resin? After cleaning that up, I started my third print. So at that point, I had already given up on that drip tray. I used my own tray. I don't know if this tray is intended to be used as an unloading tray or if it's just supposed to be used as a drip tray, but I would suggest just using it as a drip tray. I don't know if I trust it to hold the weight on larger prints. These guys came out pretty good, but I was still having issues with the burn-in layers just breaking apart. For this batch, I was able to get the models off of their supports, but I did still feel like the resin was pretty brittle. Up until now, I've been using pickle jars to wash my prints, as you can see on the right side there. So I did a completely unnecessary 3-stage wash for these. They do recommend pre-washing though to get the bulk of the resin off. The wash and cure machine I actually really like. It's nice and big. They give you a very generously sized tub. The wash mode and the cure mode both can be adjusted in 5-minute increments, starting at 5 and going up to 30. And what I love about this is that when you pause it, it goes back to the number that you originally started with. I do wish there was a 1 or 2 minute option though, because that's how long I cure for. Here's the vortex in action. It would be nice if the mesh on the underside was a little bit finer, so you wouldn't have to worry about swords and spears and stuff like that getting hit by the turbine. The tub has handles on both sides, which makes it really easy to move around. And then the tray is rectangular shaped, and it has raised trim around the edges. It's also got a couple wheels on the bottom side to keep everything level. I really like how the LEDs are in the corner. It frees up a lot more space and gives me plenty of room for the models. I never felt like I had to load this tray multiple times for each print, which has been an issue in the past with my other printers. So at this point, I had correctly deduced that the resin was being overexposed, and I started lowering the exposure by 0.1 seconds. It really wasn't that far off from what it was supposed to be. They recommend 1.3 seconds. I did get a link for the specs and I'll post that down below if you want to check it out. I was hesitant to print anything out with delicate parts, so I just printed out a couple big chonky boys. First, the based Alien Hive's Devourer, and then I also printed out their new Coal Titan from the Dwarf line. I will say that these models all came out super crisp. Like, I couldn't really find any layer lines on these models, which is kind of crazy to someone who's been printing 2K. One nice thing is that there is enough clearance to fit a resin bottle underneath the plate, just barely. A few things about the actual printer. For the size of the screen, it's super compact. It's got a dual linear rails and dual T-lead screw design, giving it supreme stability and precision. They say it gives it a 0.01 millimeter positioning accuracy. It features 92 independent light zones with UV LEDs activating only in the required areas, reducing overexposure and extending the screen's lifespan. They say it prints up to 170 millimeters per hour, but that's with high-speed resin, which I'm sure has its own drawbacks. I didn't really feel like this printer was any faster than my other printer, which I don't really blame PioCreat for. Just because of the way UV resin works, there's going to be a limit to how fast you can print with it. The machine does feel like it's built pretty well, like it does feel really solid despite having a mostly plastic shell. I like that the USB and the screen are on the top. I do not like that the power switch is on the back. I was originally really uneasy about the actual vat being lifted up and then potentially spilling resin underneath the vat. But as long as you're aware of this and you're using precautions, I don't know if it would be an issue. You definitely don't want to overfill this vat. Not that you ever do. I'll also note that it doesn't have any sort of fume extraction system. So you're either going to need to put the entire thing in a tent or a cupboard or something, or maybe keep it in a garage like I'm doing here. Another thing that you've probably noticed by now is that you can't print things flat onto the build plate. The indents from the plate are always going to be there, so I guess you could sand them down, but it does seem like a little bit of a hassle to do that. The user interface on the printer is decent. I really wish that they would show the actual layers of the print as they're printing. I personally enjoy seeing the layers as they print. I think I would have caught that there was supposed to be a base on that first print if I had the information there. And I also don't really like that you have to import files to print them. The import files section quickly gets a little crowded, and I couldn't really figure out a way to delete these files. Are you supposed to just reset the printer? During this whole process, I was using the proprietary HALOT-Box software. They do have Chi2Box support, and I've been told that there will be Lychee support, which I'm looking forward to. This software does kind of remind me of Lychee in the early stages. It definitely has a lot of kinks to work out, but it's not terrible. So you can't use LYS files in this software, you're just limited to STLs. You can drag files directly into this software as long as they're not zipped, or you can import them like this. So in my opinion, with this printer, it's beneficial to have all of the models overlapping a little bit on the print bed, which is what I've always done anyway. So this does align with my process well. I was almost immediately missing the arrange tool, which combines movement and rotation. These are separate tools in this program, so you have to use a hotkey to switch back and forth. The rotate tool is a little wonky. It doesn't stay centralized. It will spin around like this. And it's also fairly difficult to actually click on because you have to just click on this tiny line. Sometimes the rotate tool is really small, and then other times it will be way too big. And then there's this. I do not like that. That is not how I want that to work. You can move multiple files as a group, but for some reason you can't rotate them. One thing I don't really care for is how violently bright these models are that are off screen. I will often move models into the software, not really knowing what they look like, and then I decide if I want to print them or not. So it's kind of hard to do when they're so bright and hard to see. And I couldn't really find a way to change this in the software. On the resin screen, you're given a couple parameters. There's a default, and then there's a couple in Chinese script, which I can't read. I'm hoping this gets translated to English at some point. It also defaults to a 0.05 layer thickness, which I think is perfectly fine. You can edit the parameters up here. This is where you would change the exposure time and the burn-in layers. There's also a cushion layers, which I'm really not sure what that is. I was adjusting it. It didn't really seem to do anything. On the supports page, I was told you could adjust the base height, but it didn't really seem to be working for me. And I think that was my biggest pain point throughout this entire process, that the base layer just was not thick enough, and it was just causing a lot of issues. Yeah, with this support setting page, I was trying to adjust several of these parameters, and it just didn't really seem like it made any difference to the model at all, at least visually on screen. And when I printed it, it didn't really seem to make any difference. So I'm really not sure what's going on with this support setting page. It doesn't seem to work very well. Whoa. Here's what it looks like when you scrub through the layers. If you want to make a hole, you have to do that in the model section. It's pretty straightforward. One of the issues that I had was that you can't really scrub down halfway and then use that tool to punch a hole from the inside out. It kind of sticks to the outer layer even if it's not showing on screen. And then you'll frequently get error messages. One feature that they have included that I do like, but I don't know if I would ever actually use it, is this included split feature, which allows you to easily split a model in half. Pretty nice. Then there's this honeycomb structure section, which I believe is hollowing, but I couldn't really get it to work right. It's also not really something that I would suggest using on resin prints. I did find that the software really started to slow down when dealing with multiple files. The printer and the software utilize scrolling text, which I don't really care for, specifically when I'm looking at file names. Sometimes you have to wait for the text to wrap back around, which is kind of annoying. So as far as those really fragile burn-in layers, aside from being really brittle and just falling apart and making it even more difficult to remove the supports from the models, they would also break apart as I was releasing them from the plate and leave tiny sections on the plate, which I then had to scrape off, which as kind of the whole point of this printer is so you don't have to scrape stuff. If you do have to scrape stuff on this printer, it's a lot harder than it is on a normal printer, by the way. After trying and failing several times to thicken up that bottom raft, I decided to just import a square, and then I just scaled it out and flattened it down to 1.5 millimeters, and I just made my own raft. I spaced the models out on top of that and printed it out. And it kind of worked, you know. I definitely feel like I need to do some more testing with this resin, and at this point I kind of felt like I was really getting beyond the scope of this printer review. So I am going to do another video where I'm specifically going to look at this resin and just try and get as good of a print as I can, because the actual quality is fantastic, but the process just needs to be fine-tuned a little bit. I did like this printer enough to join the affiliate program. So if you're interested in picking any of this up for yourself, There is a link down below. I'll get 10% commission if you buy anything with that link. You're absolutely under no obligation to do so, but it does help me out. So thanks in advance if you do. That's about all I have to say for now. A huge thank you to PioCreat for sending this stuff out for me to review. And of course, a huge thank you to my patrons. If you want to see more videos like this or just help support the channel, Patreon membership is a great way to do that. That's it for now. Hope you have a good day, and I will see you later.